I see we also have Ken. Nice to see you, Ken. And then James, and we have Tom online as well. And welcome to all the board members. This is day 2 for us. As always, we have spent some time yesterday to just go through what's on the agenda with our observers, getting some feedback and all of that. And we have said we wanted to focus, as you know, Gabriella, on what you're doing on film culture and governance, and also your thinking. We saw that there was some communication going out as well on your strategy and work plan and all of that. What I would like to do is hand over to you. Thank you. We've seen your report and we've seen your slides. So I'm going to hand over to you, give you a bit of time to just go through all of that. And I'm going to ask the board members to hold back on their comments. After you've done that, I will maybe just give you some high-level comments of some of the things we discussed yesterday as we prepared for the session, and then we'll take it from there. But thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Linda, and everyone. As you say, it's always better to see you face to face in person, but unfortunately it wasn't possible. So let's make the best out of this virtual meeting. Thank you very much for your time. Before I start, let me just congratulate Ken, because it's his birthday. So I'm particularly grateful for his availability to be here with us today. I think it's not appropriate to sing happy birthday, but happy birthday, Ken. And thank you for joining.
Happy birthday, Ken. From all of us as well. I have a strong don't work on your birthday rule. So I'm glad that you're breaking it. We feel privileged that you're breaking it for us.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, and then I have a question, Linda. Should I share the slides, or is anyone on your side sharing the slides? How is it organized?
Martin, can I just check with you? Do we want Ken to maybe just share the slides?
No,
I can share them if you prefer.
It's fine, Gabrielle. We've all organised to do that through Pavel. Okay. As we indicated, we're happy to help you with that. So, Pavel, would you proceed?
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you.
So, and before, okay, thank you very much, Pavel. But before we move to the first substantial slide, let me just tell you that maybe you really know that this is the first meeting with the PIOB after a significant reflection undertaken by the IESBA on our strategic direction and our work for the next few times. As you know, this has been an important time for the IESBA as a board since we approached the end of the sustainability project and started a new year and a new phase. It was not always an easy time, but as usual, this difficulty sometimes trigger a new approach and a new life, and it's, I think, where we are now. So the presentation, and I'm going to try to be quick because I know that you want to save as much as possible time for questions and comments. Pavel, if you could go to the first slide. My first slides speak to what we have heard over the last times of very intense interaction and outreach with stakeholders, with very different stakeholders. I'm not going to separate what we heard from the Forum of Firms or the Paris IFAC Summit or the JSS or the SAC, but there are a lot of things that stakeholders have been telling us, which are consistent, and we are trying to focus mostly on these consistencies. And first, I think that there was from every stakeholder and the group with whom we spoke, a clear focus on the importance of enhancing the effectiveness of our due process. We heard very clear that we need to define the problems a little bit better before starting standard setting projects and initiatives. Also evaluate potential consequences, positive and negative, before launching new projects. We also heard some insistently about the need to prioritize or give the necessary importance to post-implementation reviews, And that the feedback that we are collecting from the different stakeholders should not only be collected, it must inform decisions in real time. Now, this is what we have been doing. What is missing probably is to give evidence or better evidence of this to our stakeholders. So we are not really changing anything with respect to including feedback in our work, but we are thinking about how to provide evidence to our stakeholders that the feedback has been considered, which doesn't mean always agreeing or taking it on board, but demonstrating that we have considered that feedback. We also received some suggestions or some suggestions to reflect on our strategic approach to standard setting. And this means that some stakeholders advised the ISBA to consider the possibility of taking different paths and adopting different approaches to standard setting, not only initiate new projects when we see something challenging ahead, but considering other possibilities like guidance, non-authoritative material, and etc. But it's important to say that in a context of deregulation and where some stakeholders may be a little bit surfing the wave of the political shift to deregulation, less supervision, etc., some of the stakeholders with whom we interacted, and here I need to highlight the SAC, the Stakeholder Advisory Council, which is really important because it's very diverse and it's not self-interested, it's interested because they are really providing sincere advice. The advice here was not to or to avoid so-called knee-jerk responses to this deregulatory pressure, not overreact and not take the same path. There was a clear message that we are expected to focus on our long-term mission, and that long-term missions are not compatible with navigating these political trends in a too reactive way. So the advice was keep your pace, be aware of your mandate, keep your pace. Of course, if there are things to adjust, you should adjust, but let's not forget that you are standard setters and never put a fence down before thinking why it has been put there. So next slide, please. There were also comments about the importance of using technology in our work, and of course focusing on adoption and implementation. And this focus on adoption and implementation is mostly aimed to ensure additional or more robust implementation of the ISBA standards and global consistency in this implementation. So the support that we are asked to provide to stakeholders has been very significantly flagged by our stakeholders from all groups. There is a clear awareness of the importance of the standards that the ISBA has been issuing over the last times and the need to provide the necessary support for these standards to be appropriately implemented, absorbed, stabilized, robustly embedded in the work of the practitioners and other users. So we also heard about the need to enhance stakeholder engagement, and thus this was not necessarily to do more in terms of outreach and engagement, but to do better, to improve our communications, to improve our relationship, to make it more institutionalize it a little bit more in some cases, to use more agile channels to ensure engagement with stakeholders. And this was a very strong message from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, I would say, from the JSS, the jurisdictional standard setters, from some individual stakeholders, but in some way also from the profession, that we need to better articulate our value proposition. Stakeholders need to understand why these standards are important. They need to understand the link between standard ethics, standard setting, and value creation, growth, development, resilience, etc. This was a very strong message that we are taking on board. And on the basis of everything, or not on the basis, alongside everything that we have been hearing from our stakeholders, the external input from our stakeholders, Next slide, Pavel, please. The IASBA has also been undertaking a careful reflection, internal reflection as a board about risks and opportunities. Of course, this reflection, which started mainly in March, in our March board meeting, with an exercise of assessing the board and staff's understanding of which are the main risks and the main opportunities for this board. This became a very structured and important exercise for us. Of course, in this analysis of key risks and opportunities, of course, we have embedded and included everything that we heard from our stakeholders and the external environment. And it was clear from the survey that was undertaken within the board and staff that there were clear, consistent messages about which are the key risks and the key opportunities. I'm not going to go through all of them, and I'm sure that we had the opportunity already to address at least some of them, but there are evidences. There is sustainability backlash. There is regulatory backlash as well, or deregulation trends, an idea of complexity, which is recurrent with respect to our standards, but also standard setting fatigue. The stakeholders are a little bit tired of having to respond and embed, implement, work on the accommodating new standards. At the same time, clear opportunities, and the clear opportunities for this board come mostly from the key risks and the key challenges. In times of uncertainty and deregulation, where the boundaries or the support is lower than it is usually, this context makes ethics matter even more. This environment is exactly why ethics leadership matters more than ever, and therefore, there is a major opportunity to clarify our value proposition. We must launch or build a bridge for regulatory alignment and market trust, but also to support stakeholders. So with this in mind, with all that we have heard and that we have taken and processed very seriously, we have not taken these comments and suggestions at face value. We have undertaken a very strong reflection on what we have heard, what we as a board understand to be the key risks and opportunities. Then we had a great discussion in our last board meeting about what the strategic approach to the next times should be from the IASBA. And Pavel, if you could move to the next slide, be very grateful. So can you move one more slide? Probably I want to present the next slide before, and then we can go back to the other one. So we came up to some, on the basis of very substantial discussions held at the board meeting, but also, before the board meeting, besides the board meeting with board members, staff, and some other stakeholders. We came up with a refreshed, let's call it like this, IASBA strategy, a calibrated reorientation of our work. We took into consideration the trends in the external reporting environment, all the stakeholder feedback, as I said, but also our reflection on risks and opportunities, and of course, taking into consideration the limited resources and this transition to the new staff-driven model, which also influences the strategy. Overall, we are now decided to focus on 4 main areas. Reinforcement of support on adoption and implementation, this support to the stakeholders, including simplification. I'll go back to this idea. Post-implementation reviews to be able to assess how much the standards are being adopted and how effectively they are working. The enhancement of stakeholder engagement and communications, which does not mean more outreach, does mean better outreach, more focused, more targeted, more structured and intentional, and a period of stability, meaning that no new major standards are planned before 2027. Of course, as a standard setter focused on the public interest, we can never say never, as we can never say forever. But this never say never means that, of course, we will keep very attentive to the developments around. And if there is a very quick and fast need to move and to do something, of course we will, but there is nothing planned, or we are not planning to issue any major standard until 2027. And then can you go back to the former slide, Pavel, please? So on the basis of this discussion, what we have, and on the basis of all the strong messages around better communication, better alignment, more consistency, more clarity to support the execution of this strategic work plan, we set up a framework, which is a communications framework, but it's also a strategic framework. This is the so-called SMART, IESB SMART framework, and SMART stands for simplification, mobilization, adoption, responsiveness, and targeted action, which we believe to respond to most of the considerations and advice that we have been hearing. It responds to increasing complexity and in ethical expectations. It responds to the risks of fragmentation and inconsistency. It responds to the need to make everything, the standards, more accessible, but also to keep our work and the code fit for the future, including in digital, sustainability-related changes, etc. So it's really a framework to make sure that going forward, we have some lines which will allow us to be not only aligned around some objectives, around some lines of action, to be operationally consistent and to be clear in everything that we do about our focus on achieving all these 5 objectives. Next slide, please, Pavel. Yes, this one. So on the basis of these decisions and this direction that we have taken or decided to take, we have made calibrated and approved calibrated adjustments to the IESB work plan for 25-26. So these new slides, and I'm not going to go into the details, I'll be ready for any questions that you may have, but the red ones show what has changed. So we are taking what's the ongoing work. Of course, we will not stop it, but we have decided to resequence the standard setting and NUM work streams on firm culture and governance, which means that differently from what we had decided, we are not going to prioritize the standard setting activity, but rather the NUM activity. And I'll go back to this topic afterwards. All the rest, with respect to the ongoing work, remains as is, but with a clear focus on adoption and implementation, better communication, and leaving room in our resources for any emerging and urgent issues. Next slide, Pavel, please. So 25-26, with respect to the planned work that was due to commence, some of them are not, or most of the plans are staying as they were, but we are accelerating the post-implementation review on the restructured code, given all the comments that we have been receiving on the complexity of the code, on the need to make the code more accessible, more readable, more user-friendly. So this is being anticipated to 2025, and we are putting on hold 2 planned areas of work, which is the one on exploring extending the impact of the code to all preparers of sustainability information and business relationships. And this will allow us to pause a little bit and save resources for what is needed. Next slide, please, and it's the last one. So on firm culture and governance, and this is probably the project where the shift of the strategic direction is more visible. We, as I was saying, decided on the basis of everything that we heard, on the basis of the feedback of the roundtables that we organized and the reflection undertaken, we concluded that there is a wide support for the project, a wide support and suggestions to prioritize non-authoritative material. And the feedback received was particularly useful in that respect, but there were still some doubts about the need for and the effectiveness of a standard in preventing and working on ethical failures. So on the basis of these considerations, we decided to resequence and adopt a phased approach to the standard to the firm culture and governance work. Until the end of this year, we are going to be working on IESB viewpoints on the 8 elements of the framework. And these viewpoints will help us engaging further with stakeholders, having further discussions and reinforce our own thinking and our own position with respect to these eight elements. Later in 2026, we will take stock of everything that we have done and learned over these next few months, and decide on the way forward on farm culture and governance framework, on the standard setting project, and etc. So it's a matter of getting a little bit more maturity to be able to make the right decisions on the basis of the right information and the right reflection. This, in a way, includes everything that we decided to be and to do over the next times as a board strategically. And Linda, as an annex, you have the revised work plan of the IESPA. So if there, I'm not going to go into those slides. If you have any questions, of course, ready and happy to discuss. I'll stop here and leave the time for conversations.
Thank you very much for that, Gabriela. It was very clear and very useful. Maybe a couple of comments from my side, and you know, coming out of the discussion and the preparation session we have had yesterday, and perhaps you want to respond to after that, and then I'll also just circle back to my board members and see, because you know, I'm sure they'll have some further colleagues. So firstly, and I said that to you personally as well, we certainly welcome the IESPA board standing back. I believe times to reflect where we are, what we're doing, how do we make sure that there's not just standard setting, but that there's a full understanding of the implications, the implementation difficulties, and all of those things are really important. So well done to you and your board for going through that process, which is probably the start of a process, and it will probably also evolve in the next couple of meetings as you go along. We had really good feedback from Tsecho as our observer when it comes to that as well. It's very clear what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to focus on, and focusing on some of the post-implementation reviews, getting a good understanding for what the challenges are. All of those things are really important. So well done, and certainly supported from our side. I'll probably want to spend a minute or so on firm culture and governance, and then also just ask one or two other questions. So if you're comfortable, I'm going to just deal with that, and then you can respond and circle back to us on that. So maybe firstly, firm culture and governance. And you rightfully said, and it's included in your slides as well, that it really is an important project. It's an important, it's very well supported by many, and it is important to pursue it. We have said in the past that the PIOB, the scope being very clear about the objectives and the problem that you're solving, all of those things are really important, and therefore standing back a little bit and doing some more work with stakeholders would be important and a really useful step to further inform you, which is what you said you would do. We would obviously just always say, remember, this is not something that you want to drop, but there's something that you want to pursue, but that you want to pursue responsibly. And what I heard you say was, maybe I'm paraphrasing, but was it's necessary to do it, to resequence in a way that we make sure we fully understand the issues and we fully take our stakeholders with us, which is very important, because this is quite a greenfields project, and you've done lots of greenfields projects over the past while, and to make sure you fully understand it and take stakeholders with, potentially, as you said, start with non-authoritative material, and then as you explore that and understand the impact, go into standards, would be a really sensible way forward. We would hope to believe that it's all about sequencing and timelines that are moved, and not necessarily the ultimate outcome and the ultimate objectives of the project, and changing the scope of the project, and as you set it out in the project plan. That is our understanding, and perhaps you want to comment a little bit about that. Also, the communication around that would be important, because it is important to never take the emphasis off the importance and how important this project would be, also for the credibility, continuous credibility in enhancing the profession and the image of the profession, especially when it comes to firm culture and governance as topics, because we do hear a lot about that from time to time, sometimes unfairly, but when something goes wrong, that is always a very important topic that comes out, or a question that is raised. So the communication around that, and this is not backtracking and not wanting to take on important projects, but it's meant to be doing it in a responsible way. We believe that's important communication. And then just the balance between non-authoritative material and standard setting, because you're a standard setter, but there is definitely a place in the world for non-authoritative material, and maybe the starting point in such difficult and greenfield projects makes sense to start with that. But ultimately, hopefully this will end up in some changes and enhancements to the code. So maybe just all of those things around firm culture and governance. And then possibly just an overarching additional comment or question, which I'm sure some of the board members will pick up. And that is, as you're standing back and thinking about all of this and where you are and how do you make this all more accessible and understandable and all of those things, and adoption that you've spoken about, have the board, or will the board stand back somewhere as part of this process and just reconsider I always want to say the code in its entirety, the structure of the code? We've spoken with sustainability about quite a couple of things in the code where conceptually it's not always clear. Some of the answers are pragmatic, sometimes around non-audit service fees and in which block they fall and so on. The structuring of the code is that part of what the board intends to rethink and reconsider as you go along in this process? What goes with that too is the concept of the ethics code is very different to the auditing standards in a way, because with the auditing standards, you can't carve out and still say you comply with the ISA, but with the ethics standards, you do need to be very sensitive to jurisdictional decision-making and regulation when it comes to audit independence and other things. So in a way, a firm or a country can apply the code, but actually take some things away. So it can be code minus, not just code plus. And just the conceptual potential risks when it comes to that. So those are potentially conversations that you still want to have, but maybe it's not meant for this round. But we were just wondering as we prepared what your board's thoughts are on all of those things. Thanks, Gabrielle. I'm going to hand back to you. And while you respond, also give my board colleagues a chance to put their hands up, because I'm sure they've got further comments and questions for you.
Thank you very much, Linda. First of all, thank you very much for your initial comments, and not only because they are supportive, but also because it's good to see that the PIOB has clearly understood our objectives and our approach. And that's good, because that's what we are trying to do, to be clear and transparent, not only about what we do, but also about why we are doing that. So that's good, and I think it's a good start. Now, so we are trying, yes, we think that there is space and opportunity to refine the description of the problem, of what we want to achieve, and etc., but also to make our own thinking go deeper, and above all, to be able to elaborate very clearly what we want to do with this project. So this is the opportunity that we are looking for over the next few months to clearly state our views, our perspectives on each one of the 8 topics, so that there is no doubt about what we want to achieve, what are the non-negotiables of these 8 topics, and have an opportunity to engage on concrete positions or viewpoints with our stakeholders before we make decisions about the scope of a project, the standard setting, direction, and etc. So I think that this is going to be very useful. What we expect is a very constructive dialogue with stakeholders on the basis of these materials that we are going to develop. Besides that, we are also planning to undertake some initiatives of dialogue and engagement with stakeholders, probably in a less formal way, but which will possibly allow not only the profession, but also the regulators to understand better what we want to achieve with this project. Now, with the resequencing, it's good to clarify that we are not, with this, it's resequencing, and we worked a lot on this word, not to allow any misunderstandings or misinterpretations about what we want to do with this strategic adjustment or calibration. So initially, we had decided and approved that we would put forward a strawman of the standards in June, September, so that there was an exposure draft in December. And then we would do non-authoritative material on the basis of the standard. So the idea now is to do it the other way around, is to advance some non-authoritative material. I don't like the word that much because it's not necessarily guidance about a standard that does not exist, but it's exploring the areas on which the standards will be developed further so that we can go deeper, understand the consequences, be clear with our stakeholders, and etc. We are not dropping or saying that we are going to drop anything. This is a decision that we will make next year based on what we will have done and heard and etc. over the next few months. But in principle, we are keeping the decision to develop a framework. Which framework? What kind of framework? Where is it going to be included formally, etc., in the code, outside the code, etc.? This is a decision to be made after we know exactly the scope, the depth, and etc. We cannot make that decision upfront. But there is a decision that we have not dropped to develop a framework, which we will resume next year in the second quarter or third quarter of 2026. So communications, yes, and it's not communications, it's really strategic communication. It's communication being improved at the service of the public interest, at the service of our stakeholders to clearly understand what we are doing and clearly understand the value proposition that we are suggesting, proposing to offer to the public interest. So we are making a big effort here because we heard loud and clear from our stakeholders that we have good materials that we are not being able to communicate properly. So if this is the case, and if the world now is based on communications, then we needed to make an effort in that respect. And I'm confident that it's working and that it's working very well. Now, with respect to the code. With respect to the code, Linda, so as I said, we are anticipating the PIR, the post-implementation review on the restructured code. There are a lot of comments about the code, about the complexity, and etc. Now, we need to separate things. One thing is the narrative about complexity, and what we are asking our stakeholders is to be concrete about the areas and the reasons of complexity, because it's very easy to say that it's complex, but it's probably not that easy to come up with concrete problems and concrete ways of overcoming the problems. This is not going to take anyone very far if we insist on the complexity, but we are not aware or fully aware of where the complexity comes from. So the PIR will certainly help in that respect. Now, it's not that we are waiting for the end of the PIR on the restructured code to do not do anything in the meantime. I'm not promising anything. This is something that the board will consider of the next times, but there is an opportunity, or there are opportunities to make small steps to allow better understanding and more of the code, and to make it more user-friendly. And that can be done by, I'm not going to be more concrete than this, but there are things that we have been discussing and that we can do to allow the better and usability of the code without changing the standards, without any kind of deregulation or lowering the bar or whatever. So this is on the table. This is something that we are considering. We need to consider it very careful before we go out with something, but it's not only on our radar, but there are already discussions about small steps that we can make immediately, the so-called low-hanging fruit, to allow better understandability of the code. The risk of code minus, as you said, yeah, it's a risk, and that concerns us because that means fragmentation and inconsistency, and fragmentation does not help anyone. Does not help even those who think that are helped by this fragmentation, and the jurisdictions who opt to take parts of the code away, and etc. So we are attentive. Our adoption and implementation working group is very attentive to, well, as much as they can, because this requires a lot of resources. But this is something that is on our radar, etc. And if anything, we are focused on establishing or keeping a dialogue with some of the stakeholders who can be responsible for some decisions which may trigger this inconsistency or fragmentation in the application of the code.
Thank you, Gabriella. I'm going to go to Dave and to Mark, and then I'll circle back to you for comments. Thanks, Dave.
Great. Thanks, Linda. And thanks, Gabriella, for that update. That was great. I just have some questions, and you alluded to this in your last response, so I need to reword the question from what I was thinking before. But when we refer to non-authoritative materials on firm culture and governance, you just indicated you didn't like that word, and that's the point I was going to raise. Is generally non-authoritative materials are anchored to a statement or a standard, but in this case we won't have a standard. So I'm just thinking, as I think about that, I think maybe there's some other terminology that should be used so it isn't confused with other non-authoritative material that is issued with a standard or after a standard. But it also made me think about how we just have to be careful of the risk of standard setting through non-authoritative materials without all the same due process and so forth. And so it's just a suggestion, I think, to think about what those and I'll use that term, non-authoritative materials, what those materials might be that you'd issue prior to standard setting, and if there's a way to frame that so that it's part of the process of determining what to do in standard setting, which I think is what you're saying. I just suggest maybe we think about that and be careful about the terminology so that it's clear that we're not setting standards through a process other than the due process that we've put in place here. So that's it. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Dave. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Linda, and thanks, Gabriella, for your sort of presentation there. I had two questions which are sort of related. I'd start with the first overall question, and that is around the strategic plan. Now, we of course go through a process where the strategic plans of both boards are submitted to the PIOB for consideration and approval. And we approved your strategic plan 2024 to 27 last April. Now, in your commentary, you said basically that your board had decided that it was going to make these changes to the plan. Don't you think actually, if you're making significant changes to a plan which has been approved by the PIOB, you should first come back to the PIOB with your proposals and seek the PIOB's approval of those proposals. I have a follow-up question to ask, but I'd like you to get your sort of feedback on that one first, if I may.
And Gabriella, maybe just before you respond, we don't really, as the PIOB, approve. We certify standards, but we note strategic plans, but it's not, it's sort of not something that we say yes or no to. We give input and we flag concerns and so on. So yeah. Okay. Do you want to come in, Gabriella, and maybe just talk about your thinking around that?
So should I, thank you very much, Linda and Mark. Should I respond to Mark and then leave Dave for later, for my later response?
In whatever way you prefer.
No, you tell me, I'm happy to do. So I'll start with Dave. So Dave, thank you very much for your comment. I think that you're absolutely right that we need to be careful about not setting standards through NUM. That's not the intention, that's not the objective, and that would not be right. And that would not be effective because standards are effective because they follow a due process, because they are recognized as being developed in accordance to a certain process, because they are certified by the PIOB, and etc. So one thing is one thing, and another thing is another thing. Secondly, I also agree, and that's why I'm not always comfortable with the word non-authoritative material. It's because it's generally understood as something that the boards do to develop or make the standards, the existing standards, a little bit more clear. Well, what we are doing here is not exactly that, because we haven't made standards yet. It's not that the code doesn't have any anchors; they have very small anchors to this. To our view, insufficient. But anyway, and we will use them as possible. But it's not the intention to do any kind of standard setting through NUM. Actually, what we are intending to do is to be clear to our stakeholders about what our views are and allow stakeholders to engage and provide feedback, input, etc., before we start drafting the standards. I think this couldn't be more fair, transparent, and loyal to stakeholders. Instead of starting and asking after, before starting, we are asking. Of course, we have done round tables, we have done all these things, and we could very clearly say, it's enough, we did a lot of outreach, we have what we need, and let's move forward. But we thought it's still time to engage a little bit further, and because sometimes stakeholders seem not to be absolutely clear about what the IASB's views, perspectives, and intentions are. We need to be clear about that with these few points, so that there is no, I think we couldn't be more transparent and open in that respect. Now, with respect to the terminology, if you have some suggestions, please, because we have been struggling a little bit as well. We call about supporting materials, initiatives, etc. But it's not always easy to replace a term that has been used over times very intensively, and that everyone recognizes more or less as not being standard setting. So we use NUM as opposed to standard setting. So I think that I hope that with this I have responded to your question. To your question, Mark, yes, as Linda said, the PIOB does not approve the strategy and work plan, which of course does not mean that we do not take on board the PIOB's views and etc. And that of course we are comfortable when the PIOB is comfortable as well, no doubt about it. Now the changes that we have been making is not this. This does not mean a new strategy. This means that within the strategy and work plan that has been approved by the board and considered, submitted to the PIOB to consideration, and that the PIOB considered, that we are doing adjustments, resequencing, etc. And if you allow me, Mark, let me recall something that I have said probably 100 times when we were developing the strategy and work plan, and when it was approved by the board and presented by the PIOB. No strategy and work plan, that's my opinion, these days can be rigid to a point that we should not do adjustments as we go. The world changes every day. The needs and the priorities are different every day. So I think it's a matter of responsibility and accountability of these boards to be able to look at what we have approved 2 years ago and say, well, we need to resequence, or we need to put something on hold to use our resources on what's needed more at each time. That's what we are doing. If you look at the last slides of the presentation, Mark, what changes in terms of what we had approved is the strategy and work plan formally is the same. Is that the timings, the priorities, etc., and the approach to some of the projects is being reconsidered according to what our stakeholders have been telling us, the development of external trends, externalities, the context, and etc. So, of course, I'm bringing this here. I couldn't, I mean, we could have just done this, but I'm bringing this here exactly because I want to hear from the PIOB what your understanding is about the changes that we have made or the adjustments, the calibrations that we have made in our strategy and work plan. And of course, happy to hear from you.
Thanks. And Mark, you said you wanted to come back with another question?
Yes, I did, and I take that on board. I mean, the PIOB did issue a press release in April last year. I've just had a look at it, and it basically it doesn't approve the plan. You're quite right, but it says that the plan has been prepared in accordance with due process. So, I take on board the fact that you can't have a rigid plan. And just not change it at all in light of circumstances. So I accept that. But as a follow-up to that, I'd now like to just focus specifically on the firm culture and governance project. Now, that was included in the strategic plan, and the intention was that there would be some sort of standard or code introduced. And this, of course, this project was in response to the requests and needs of various stakeholders. Now, and I know you've had your roundtables to do lots of outreach on this project, but looking at it from an external point of view, it just strikes me that the move away from preparing a code to preparing non-authoritative materials has been largely driven by feedback from the profession and the accounting firms to the effect that they don't need a code and they don't want a rigid code, etc., etc. And much the same as you get, or we got, say, in the UK from corporates when the corporate governance code in the UK was first introduced in the 90s. It was, well, we don't really need a code and what have you. And it just, from an external perspective, I think the optics of that are that people might get the impression that the board has been unduly influenced by the profession in changing tack, and I think there's that needs to be handled very carefully. My second point is on this reliance on non-authoritative materials, and I think Dave made a good point about use of terminology here, but there is a problem that material is outside the current due process and oversight. And so as things stand, you as a board can publish that material, and we as the PIOB have no role in reviewing or opining on that material before it is issued. And it's not only in relation to firm culture and governance. I mean, I know you are shortly going to issue a staff alert on PE, for example, and We have not seen a draft of that. As far as I'm aware, there are no plans for us to see a draft of that. I think my point is, if you as a board are going to rely more on non-authoritative material, or whatever term we use for it, I think we need to, as a standard-setting group, if you like, look at how it would be appropriate for that non-authoritative material to be encompassed within some sort of due process or review. So that would be the point that I would make on that. And those are the 2 points that I wanted to make, specifically on the overall strategy and on the FCG project. Thank you.
Gabriella, maybe I can go to Janine as well before you respond. Thanks.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
Linda. Let me just ask you, can you see me? Because I can't see you. You all disappeared from my screen.
Oh.
But if you can see me, it's okay.
We can see you.
Okay, fine.
Okay, hello, Gabriella. Thank you for your presentation. I have also a follow-up question on the firm culture and governance and the NAM in particular. And some of my comments have already been discussed, or questions were raised. But there's one thing I like to understand a little bit better. And that is, well, the NAM that needs to have a different kind of term. And then I was wondering, is it then a sort of thought leadership paper that you have in mind? But there is already this lengthy paper, that final paper that was actually the kickoff of the project, that highlighted all the areas that are relevant for this project and to be further worked on. So this product for 26 that you have in mind, which is then not a standard setting product, but something else, and also not NAM. What is the objective of that, and what do you want to achieve with that, in addition to what is already out there? It's not clear to me yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriella. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I keep on not seeing you, but that's not a problem. I hope you don't have angry faces. So, Mark.
Everybody looks quite chilled, Gabriella. Don't worry.
Yeah. So, Mark, I'm not going to call it by the name that I think you wanted to call it, but you are suggesting that the recalibration or resequence, which is really the word that we are decided to make from culture and governance, has been mostly driven by some objections from the profession, and that's not exactly like that. Of course, we heard from the profession, and the profession was generally not very comfortable with the project. Besides other possible reasons, and I'm not going to speculate, because I think it wasn't clear for them what the ISBA wanted to achieve and how with this project. There was some unclarity, uncertainty, and you know that uncertainty and unclarity brings fear. So we thought that it would be important to make them, not only the profession, and I'll go to the other stakeholders, but to make stakeholders in general more comfortable, fearless, by understanding better what the ISBA wanted to do, why, what was the public interest issue that we were trying to achieve, even if we did a lot in trying to explain it. This is, as Linda mentioned, this is a green area where almost nothing has been done since today. So it's difficult for people to foresee what this thing is going to be. That's why, and that's not about pressure, this is not about undue influence, this is really about a very thoughtful process of the ISBA of making sure that we are accountable to the commitment, or for the commitment of being transparent and clear about what we want to achieve. We are confident that with some additional time, of course, time to explain better, to position ourselves more clearly against the report that we have issued. We are confident that with this, some of the fear triggered or driven by uncertainty will disappear. Moreover, what we were seeing, and again, in a very green area, was that regulators were opening the eye, but still awaking for what this could be and how useful this could be. There is a lot of interest. There are regulators already undertaking, on the basis of the instruments that they already have, some supervisory oversight actions with respect to firm culture and governance, but still some additional maturity and additional awareness about the substance of the topic was needed. And that's why we decided to do it in a resequenced way, to go out with some, and now I'm responding to Janine at the same time, go out with some one-page, well, maybe two, but not more than that, materials on each one of the topics, so that stakeholders, the PIOB as well, may understand what we understand to be each one of these topics and how we are going to address them. So this is not about dropping, this is not about giving up, this is not about a race to the bottom, this is not about knee-jerking, nothing of that. It's about being more responsible and doing what we want to do, which is still the same, in a more responsible and more transparent way. And if possible, and as possible, bring stakeholders along with us in this project. And the fact, Mark and PIOB board members, is that very interestingly, and I'm happy with that, some firms are already putting in place over the last months a few things that the report already says that it would be important and that we would probably work in that direction. I can give you examples, not here, but there are very, very significant examples of situations and firms in different parts of the globe which are putting in place already a few things that we had considered and put forward as for consideration as possible elements of a future framework. So this is working, and that's the objective. We are not self-serving. We work for the public interest, and we want these developments to happen. On the NAM and what it means, the process and etc. Mark and also somehow Janine, what we have heard extensively in the roundtables that we have organized, 4 roundtables in 4 different parts of the world, very diversified stakeholders, was a consistent support for to prioritize, let's call it like this, non-authoritative material, or whatever we want to call it. That was the great support that we had, both from the profession, but also significantly from other stakeholders, namely the regulators, like, show us what it means before we can take a position. So this doesn't mean, again, anything, and I already responded to Dave. We don't want to set standards through NOM, and the fact that these materials are not authoritative, it's the reason why they are not included in the due process, because they don't have the nature of an authoritative standard. So jurisdictions, firms, etc., are free to decide to take them on board or not to take them on board, and that's why a very robust due process with certification from the PIOB, etc., has not been considered as being needed for this for these materials. Now, will they influence? We hope so. We hope that they will influence stakeholders in taking a position once, if and when an exposure draft comes out, and they are very clear and very sure about what the ISBA wants to achieve with these materials. Nothing more than that, but all of that, because we think, and I think as a ISBA chair, I really think that our mission and our mandate does not start and finish, and would not be effective if we were only standard setters, putting standards forward and then forgetting about them.
Thanks so much, and I'm conscious of the time, but I quickly want to circle to Ken for a minute, because I saw he had his hand up. And then give Philippe another minute, because he's been patient with his hand, and then we do need to wrap up the session. So Ken, if you have hopefully you can make it a short comment, but it is important to hear from you. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Linda, and I'll be very brief. I just want to provide an additional point of context, really, in relation to essentially what we have been hearing from stakeholders in terms of the resequencing, the direction on that. In our conversation with the Audit Oversight Group, IFIOB, the Standards Coordination Working Group, we did receive comments to the effect as to who was pushing for a standard on firm culture and governance. So there's a bit of an open question there, even from the regulatory side. There was also a concern about standards overload. In fact, there was very clearly articulated within the Standards Coordination Working Group at IFIOB. So it's not just a profession that's concerned, but from the regulatory oversight perspective, they are also very sensitive to the volume of standards that the firms are having to grapple with, and therefore a bit of a cautionary note, if you will, as to they need to be very sensitive to going or plunging headlong into standard setting right away, and not really fully understanding where the standards might lead and what the implications of the standards might be for all who are going to be involved, the firms as well as those who will be overseeing and enforcing those standards. So I just want to provide a little bit of that context as well.
That's useful. Thank you very much, Ken. Philippe?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Gabriela, for your very energetic presentation, as usual, in the heart of summer, within these dog days. It's very revigorating. Thank you for that. Just a very broad question indeed. In the context of your strategic thinking, did you consider the possibilities of designing new ways of working in connection with the IAASB? There are different forms we can contemplate, from separate working, coordination, and at the top of that, some common, I would say, projects. So to what extent, because it's something I've heard permanently since I joined the PIOB, the fact that difference of meaning on the IAASB side and IASBA, difference of approach and so on. So there are different projects on both sides, I think, of technology, and so on, which could be addressed by common teams. That means merge rather than, thinking of coordination, and which could be the result of, design of new way of running projects, common projects, on both organizations. And so I'd like to have your view on that. Thank you, Linda, for your comprehension.
Thank you so much. And we are going to have a detailed session in the next round with Tom and Gabriela on common projects, joint projects, coordination, and all of that. So I don't think this is a question with a quick answer. So I am going to just leave the seat there with you, James. I see James's hand is up as well, James and Gabriela, and we're going to let it stand over for the next time, because I think it warrants a more fulsome conversation at our next meeting. Gabriela, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Ken. It is very, and maybe I'll just sort of in summarizing what we've heard, it is very important for us that the standard setting board applies their mind like you did, and apply your mind freely and independently, and listen to your stakeholders and decide which is the most appropriate way forward. I'm certainly comforted by the fact that you talk about sequencing, and maybe what we call now non-authoritative material, NAM, is a stepping stone in the direction of the standards, which is understandable and which could potentially be wise. And we've made the point that it is important that we don't miss that ultimate goal of what you're trying to do through the process. But I thought that there were lots of comforting responses from your side, and we're looking forward to also seeing how this develops. It is important in a time, this alignment between yourselves again, in a time of let's just regroup, align where we are, think about where we are, also think about the way we go into the future with joint or common projects and so on. It's a very important time to spend as both boards in planning ahead for the future. So thank you very much. Thanks, Gabriella, and thank you, Ken. We've already said welcome to Tom, but also welcome to Willie. And we still have James with us to talk about the IAASB. Thank you to the IAASB as well. We've seen, Tom, your report. We've seen your slides, and I'm going to hand over to you. There are quite a bit of things happening. We also prepared yesterday for our session with you. We've got PI Track 2 that's not up for certification at this meeting. We have a special meeting in August, which we're going to do that because there's still a bit of paperwork to be done around that. So over to you, Tom. Again, I'm going to let you speak and go through your presentation, and then I'll share a few thoughts from our side before we open it up for discussion. Thank you.
Oh, it's very good to see all of you. I was listening intently on the last presentation from Gabriella and team. But first of all, I'd be remiss not to thank the PIOB for your continued confidence that you've provided in reappointing me. I'm excited for the challenge of the next 2.5 years. I could reassure you that there's no rest for the weary. We have some important things to accomplish still. And it very much coincides with our completion of our strategy that is about maintaining and enhancing our position as the leading audit and assurance standard setter that's able to evolve to changing public interest needs. We've talked quite a bit over the last couple of meetings about this board at a transition from a work plan perspective, and you're sort of seeing us straddle that position with the topics that you asked for a deep dive on. And I don't know who's going to have the slides, but I could also just refer to the slides as well. But when you think of PI Track 2, and while we're doing this right now, we know that it'll be put forward for certification later, but we thought we'd give you how we've evolved since we last met. So, as you know, we put out a proposal that would align our board with IASBA's publicly traded entity concept, that would amend our standards to include that concept, and then the idea that we would return at a future date with input and involvement from IASBA about whether to adopt a PI definition in our standards. So that's what we went out with, the urging and suggestions and great coordination with the PIOB. We put it out for public consultation, which you'll see on slide 4 of the deck, for 45 days. We wanted to make sure as many people participated in the consultation process as possible. So we reminded all the people who participated in the original round, plus we wrote to others throughout the process. And we did receive 37 comments. 30 of them had previously responded to our exposure draft. We also had some really deep discussions with monitoring group members, particularly IOSCO, in the process. If you flip the slide to what we heard, and largely, I think, next slide, please. And if you think about what we heard is, I think there was strong support for the pragmatic position that we took, not to say that people recognized it as 100% satisfactory decision for the long term. And we've talked about this quite some time. We view this as a positive step forward as jurisdictions adopted the PI definition created by IASBA. And, you know, one letter more than anything else sort of reflected this sort of mixed point of view. The IOSCO C1 letter, which basically said they support concluding the current proposal, but we want you to think about where you go next. And if you need a PI definition for your standards to be the basis of differential requirements, and that's really what this is about, in 8 areas, then you should go ahead at a point in the near future. Also, there was some comment from European regulators too. They wanted to make sure what we did on PTE was consistent with what exists in regulations, particularly using the term listed entities. We have now provided some clarification of that. We do believe it's consistent, and we used implementation guides. So again, there was big support for what we were doing in terms of the pragmatic way forward. We aligned the effective dates with going concern and fraud, though we permit early adoption. We talk about our preference to have them done as a package and suggest that was our intent if you're going to move forward. But more importantly, we talk about what's next. And, you know, I think the idea is to do as much jointly with IASBA, not independently, as possible. And both boards are supportive of this approach, and they reiterated that. We reiterated that at our June meeting. So these are some of the ideas on slide 6 of what we're thinking about. I think Philippe talked about sort of as joint as possible, and here are real ways. Now, obviously, we have to implement this. There probably needs to be more thought about how to do this effectively. But whatever we do next, despite IOSCO's urging for us to do what we think is right from an audit side, I think the first point is to do things jointly with IASBA. And so that is in process right now, and us figuring out how to execute best on it. But we wanted to signal to you and to the market that both boards are committed to a joint effort together. Maybe the next thing to do is move to 2410, reviews the interim financial information. And really, we're going to, why you think about the standard, you know, it isn't a standard that has caused fundamental public interest concerns, but it is a standard that is used quite a bit because interim financial information is reported all the time and in different jurisdictions mandatorily. The problem with 2410 is that it hasn't ever been updated to the clarity approach, and it just is outdated in many ways, not to reflect our latest thinking on a few issues. So we talked about at this last meeting about minimum viable project. Our goal is not a major rewrite of this standard. It's about clarifying and updating it, and clarifying that the interim review is just a type of limited assurance engagement, and we're not trying to change the fundamental work effort here in the process. So if you look at on this slide, we talk about grounded in our goals. What's the underlying public interest? To drive consistency in practice regarding these interim review engagements, to make sure that there's a global baseline for this in the interim review engagements, and provide more specificity aligned with modern thinking in ISAs and equivalent national standards. And in this regard, one of the unique things is about leveraging partnerships here. We're doing this with partnerships with the Australian and New Zealand standard setters, who are very much integrated into our work team, and in 2 jurisdictions where they've done significant work on interim financial reporting. So that is at the heart of it. Now, if you switch to the next slide, it gives you a little bit of sense of what we're doing. We very much are leveraging elements of existing standards. This is not new to us. You know, you might recognize we did quite a bit of this in 5000 too. So we're taking a little bit from ISRE 2400 that are relevant to inter-review engagements. We're drawing on ISAs themselves in a way that's proportional to what our review engagements are. Remember, ISAs are about reasonable assurance engagements. We are not trying to recreate that, but focusing on a limited assurance engagement. And then we're taking some of the best thinking in 2410. But again, sort of applying the constraint about what's the minimum viable product necessary to get this standard updated and useful on a global basis. One of the areas that we did get feedback on, both from the board and from PIOB participation, is the timeline. Remember, we made the declaration, no new major standards before 2027. This would not fit into the major standard category. In fact, we're being asked by standard setters and practitioners to update the standard. So we looked at our resource availability, and we figured while we had originally stretched it out to the 2027 thing, we saw that we could accelerate the timetable a little bit here. And so, you know, you'll see right here is that we anticipated a vote next year, early next year, to approve the ED. And so we've compressed the timetable so we can get this out into the marketplace as soon as possible. Let me turn to the final area, audit evidence and risk response. Aaron, if you could see the first slide of this, which is on slide 12 of your deck, and what drives this area. So first of all, I should say this is probably the most complex and technical project that we have on our work plan, and will have deep implications potentially for audits. You know, it's the core of the audit, you know, gathering audit evidence and the risk response. And it also, from our standpoint, is one of the 3 tracks that we're dealing with from a technology perspective. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about improving the application of professional judgment and professional skepticism, and gathering audit evidence and risk response. And then objective B, and this is something we align very closely with you as the PIOB, is not only about general promoted consistent practice in auditor about effective responses. This sort of is a follow-on from 315, but with a special emphasis on include the strengthening of auditors' work on internal controls. And then C, obviously, is making sure that these standards are fit for purpose to address technological innovation and the evolution of new technological resources and tools. And so this is the goal. These are public interest things. At the end of the day, we'll have to circle back to make sure that we've fulfilled these objectives. And that's what we'll be judged on. But during the process, we've specified a large range of issues to tackle as a result of that assessment. And it will look quite detailed when we go through the technical debates at the board. It just is the reality of these standards, that it's a highly conceptual standard, highly technical things. We need to get this right because it'll drive audit methodology. So we're at the very early stages of this project. And what I would like to say is that while we go through all the issues, and you flip the slide, that everything is an informed hypothesis at this moment that we're working to test with external stakeholders. This means we're having focused discussions with users where necessary, which is quite complex on technical issues. We had detailed discussions with jurisdictional standard setters, and we're monitoring national developments on this age. We're constantly doing deep dive sessions with practitioners through the form of firms and the GPPC, but also with audit regulators, and we'll have regular working groups and workshops. That's where we are right now as we go through the range of complex technical issues on this standard. And if you go to the final slide, you'll start to see the topics that we've are dealing with. And I know some of them are topics that the PIOB care deeply about, such as stand back requirements and how we make sure that we're using them appropriately. For example, our desire to have a systematic approach to it. And, you know, we're putting a stand back in 330, but also one in 700 as it relates to this. But we've done that after a systematic assessment of where stand back should go. Authenticity, a big topic. We've talked about the paragraph in 200. We shouldn't focus just too much on one sentence, but it's important about when we redraft, think about redrafting anything in ISO 200 on authenticity, that the objective of the appropriate work effort is there to be done, that we provide context of what's required in terms of professional asceticism, and that we look to other wording that exists in our standards to reinforce the necessary auditor's work effort as it relates to authenticity of documents. A lot of focus on test of controls. And then we get to discussions about how we deal with automated tools and techniques and changing the words and how this fits in the process. We are at an early stage of this journey, but we wanted to give you a flavor of the topics that you as a board have raised with us, are getting serious consideration, and are filtering through to the stakeholder outreach as we go along. And as I said, it's one of those topics that you may think that we're just too much in the weeds to begin with, but we're into the weeds because we've done an assessment of what ties back to the public interest objectives up front. And then clearly we'll have to step back to make sure that the picture all makes sense. So I'm going to pause there. Really wanted to open it up to discussion from you on anything I raised here, anything on our work plan, strategy and work plan, or any other topics that we have ongoing at the board that were in my written report.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. And Tom, maybe just some comments from our preparation session, and I'll sort of maybe take it in the reverse order, starting with audit evidence and risk response, and you talking about potentially being in the weeds. You're right. It is a very technical project. It is something that is exceptionally important, and we've raised it as an important project. We also supported your way forward in dealing with this project and the alignment and link between that, and how do you integrate the whole concept of technology throughout the audit and into the audit methodology. So certainly supported by the PIOB. As you know, our job is not to tell you how to do your job. Our job is to tell you why we think it's important and why, or what we believe would be in the public interest. So we do understand that you as a board need to go through your processes of how do you distill that, how do you work through that, so that you can ultimately come to the appropriate level of requirements, updating, and application material in the standards. So definitely a very, very important project for us, and we're looking forward to seeing how that evolves. On 2410, I've actually even forgotten about the Clarity project until you mentioned it now, which is, what is it now, probably 20 years ago, 15 or so. But it is in very big parts of your jurisdiction a really important standard to update, and we understand what you're saying, that this is not a whole makeover. It's an alignment of actually how the rest of the standards fit together. It is important, certainly in the space where I operate, there's always the risk, because the standard is so old and out of date, that different auditors apply it differently. So it's important that you go ahead and do that. It's inevitable, if you touch a standard like that with limited assurance, that the bigger debate on what's the bar for limited assurance and how does limited assurance and reasonable assurance fit together, and definitions and so on, I think you're going to have to prepare yourself for that. I know that's not the scope of this project, but it is important as you start thinking about your strategy and work plan going forward. It might be necessary to pick up that topic again. I don't think it's somewhere that the question will continue to come up as you put it out for, we think, as you put it out for consultation and so on. And then just on PI-track 2, because it is the last time that we have a chance to talk to you about it, and it has been a complicated project in a way, because it was meant to just be a response, or let's call it dealing with the consequential amendments needed because of the work that IESPA has done on the definition of PI, with a very specific objective around, audit independence and so on, and non-audit services. But we have encouraged you to put it out for another round of consultation, and we're very comfortable that you did. We believe that is an appropriate way to show that you really considered stakeholder input, and we obviously saw the input. Thank you. We had very good feedback from Mark as well as our observer regarding all the different stakeholders and how they came back, and also the support when it comes to where you are, bearing in mind that it is not necessarily the end game. There's certainly a job to be done and a potential project, a joint project potentially between yourselves and IESPA, as IESPA also, and you said you're going to do that as IESPA goes into their post-implementation review on the PI definition of what is it that you, between the two of you, need to align when it comes to that. So we recognize that, and that was not yet the intention of this project, but that is where you are now. The one outstanding question that we have to ask is just around IOSCO, because you gave a little bit of feedback on that, but in the way that we understand it is IOSCO was strongly encouraging for pick it up. You don't have to have the same definition as IESPA. We understand your risk around that, and maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the very importance of consistency when it comes to definitions in audit across jurisdictions. But maybe just if you could just sort of close the loop for us on IOSCO, where they stand, and how the comfort that you got that going ahead the way you do for now, bearing in mind that there might be further project coming up in due course, as you referred to, is okay. I think that is the one that is sort of hanging in the air. And I've made the point, but maybe just to put it as a separate point, is the importance of, I almost want to say, PI definition 2.1 somewhere in the fairly near future on how do we take that forward out of the lessons learned from what IOSCO IESPA will see in their post-implementation review, and how can we better align and further take this forward jointly as the two standard setting boards. Just give me 1 second. I just want to make double sure that I haven't. No, I think that I picked up on all the key points. I'm going to let you come back, and I see Tom's hand is up. So maybe just come back on this, some of the general things, and then I'm going to go, as I do always, into the hands up from my board members. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you for that. I dare to say PI-track 3 already, but anyway, we had a high degree of confidence that, first of all, that IOSCO was supportive of what we were concluding on and what we will certify to you. Vili and team had a number of conversations with the C1. Secretariat confirmed, because their letter, we wanted to make sure that we interpreted it properly, and they confirmed that they were happy with us to go ahead. And what the slight nuance that they said was, don't be constrained by IESPA going forward on the PI definition. Now, they didn't say don't do something with IESPA. And our starting point is, let's make sure definitions are as consistent as possible, or even the same as possible, Otherwise, we're going to cause confusion in the marketplace because there's a huge overlap with what. So my attitude is to satisfy them. The first place to go is to do something jointly with IESBA on the using their post-implementation review as the starting point. What we haven't quite done is how to figure out the mechanics of doing that. So Vili's and our team's plan are to have a discussion with IOSCO in this month, just to circle back with them. That at least that's the first point, and then we could make a determination going forward if perfect convergence isn't achieved, whether we need to go our separate ways. But I would prefer to view that as a second best or third best alternative, and let's see where we land. And ideally, we'll start first now. And I think that's consistent with what they said, is just don't feel constrained. Well, certainly it's a better solution if we remain consistent and aligned.
Tom, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for clarification, Tom, for this an important topic and PyTrack too. What I would like to ask you is, not ask you, but to ask Gabriela, is that your view on this issue, because the frustration of the IOSCO is not to IWSB, but perhaps to IESBA, because as Tom has suggested, that in the expression, don't feel constrained by the joint project, perhaps. So what is important is that not only the view of the IWSB, but also to the view of the IESBA. My impression is that it's very difficult for IESBA to change the Q&A, which says that the jurisdictional law integration override the code definition. But so if it doesn't change, so it will take quite a long time for the joint project on this issue. So although generally I support the joint project, but if this issue of the relationship with code and law regulation is difficult to solve in a short period of time, I feel some sort of sympathy to the position of IOSCO to say to IWSB that they don't feel constrained. So what is your view on this difficult issue of the relationship of the court and then law and regulation?
So my view?
No. Gabriela's view. I'm asking Gabriela if possible.
So Gabriela, let's keep it short because this is actually Tom's meeting. So maybe you want to have a minute and then we circle back to you, Tom. Thank you.
Well, I'll be very short because what I have to say is that this letter was not directed to the IESBA, but to the IWSB. Of course, we are aware of the IOSCO's thinking, but we haven't yet discussed if there is anything to be done at this point in time on this topic. So we cannot. I mean, we can always change the Q&A, but the Q&A just explain what the standard says. Even if there was a different understanding. So to change the Q&A, we'd have to change the standard, I believe. So this is something that we need to consider together with the IWSB and on the basis of very extensive discussions that we may need to have to see if there is anything that we can do in that respect. And so I'm not in a position, Tom, unfortunately, to say that our vision, what the standard is, what it is. It was approved, it was certified, and etc. The Q&A explain what the standard says, whether if there is a need to change it, that is something that we need to discuss, certainly. So, but we will work very closely with IWSB to at least see ways of mitigating any issues that this different definition may bring, and how we can help stakeholders navigating these differences. But I'm not in a position, Tom, today to say we are going to do this or we are going to do that. This is a very, very significant discussion based on what happened before, that I cannot tell you today because it hasn't been discussed.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Gabriela.
much.
And again, we'll have the conversation when we have the joint discussion on potential joint projects and collaboration and so on. And Gabriela, I'm sure when we have that discussion, you'll also give us some feedback. If I recall, you have on the cards a post-implementation review and all of those things. So let's park the joint element of that for now. I think everybody is quite up to speed and in agreement that it is something that will need a lot of collaboration and working together. So Tom, I'm going to just circle back to you for any comments, and then I'm going to go to the next hands that are up. Thanks.
Yeah, it's which Tom? Me or?
Oh, no. Go ahead, Tom.
No, you're Tom. Go ahead. Sorry. Too many
Thank you
Toms
very
on
much.
this call.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much for the comment to Gabriela for your comment. And just I want to remind you that the Q&A, as you said, that this Q&A is really significant in the sense of, so we have to be a little bit and pay attention to the due process of if you would like to change the Q&A of this issue, because the relationship between the law and regulation and the court is one of the fundamental issue of the code itself. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Back to you, Tom.
Well, again, I think we're at a good place right now to be able to soon assess what's happening in the marketplace. I'm an optimist, and I don't want to preempt the work that's going ahead. You have both Gabriela and my commitment to do things jointly going forward. And I think will be led by the evidence and see what the appropriate next steps are. I think it's in our interest to encourage the adoption of the PI definition set forward by IASBA, and it's in our interest to work jointly with IASBA. And that's where we are as a board.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to go to Mark.
Thanks, Linda. I'm just going to comment very briefly on PI Track 2 because I think everybody's fed up with it. But I think our Tom put his finger on the issue here, the fundamental issue and the fundamental problem, and that is the design of the ISAs versus the code, and that is ISAs require compliance with the ISAs. In the code, if there is jurisdictional requirements, those take precedence and you can still be in compliance with the code. And so until there is jurisdictional uniformity, or at least the major jurisdictions are all uniform, this problem is going to continue. So I wonder actually whether a joint project will actually be able to get anywhere. And I do recall I observed the IAASB meeting back in June last year when the IASBA Q&A was discussed. And I remember suggesting at the time that the IAASB calls PI by another name for use in its in the ISQMs and the ISAs. Call a dog by another name was the expression I used. And it's interesting that actually that's pretty much what IOSCO are saying should happen. So I do wonder whether given the jurisdictional differences that exist, whether a joint project will be successful and whether actually you should start, at least behind the scenes, looking at a differently named definition for use in the ISAs. But that's enough on PI. I wanted to just make a comment on audit evidence and risk response, because yes, it was a very intense and complex discussion, and frankly it made me realize I'm glad that I left the audit profession 30 years ago and didn't have to deal with all that stuff. But I think seriously, the project proposal on this, as all project proposals tend to, focused on the need to sort of meet the characteristics in the public interest framework, the PIF, and key amongst those in this respect, I think, are clarity and conciseness, understandability. And it was a very esoteric discussion, you know, quite academic in some respects. And I sat there listening to it, and I thought, you know, there were so many, you know, there was discussion about the difference between, you know, a definition and a description, and then all the nuanced cross references between the various standards. And I just felt that yes, you have to address technical issues. I do get that. You're a technical board, but I think you need to keep coming back to those characteristics of the PIF, because in order for a standard to be effective, it's got to be understandable and implementable. And my concern is that you're not taking the opportunity to clarify and simplify these standards so that they are more accessible to the smaller audit practitioners who don't necessarily have the you know, the depth of technical knowledge, technical resource that the bigger firms have. So yes, I accept it's got to be technical, but I think you should try and make every effort you can to make these standards easily understandable and accessible to those with limited technical resources.
Thank you, Mark. Tom, do you want to come in?
So we're writing these standards for experienced auditors. These are complex topics. We have not done the drafting of the standard yet, and we will always focus on clarity and scalability in the drafting of the standard. So I'm not in my head in agreement right now saying, yes, of course, we're going to do, but make no mistake, like, we're not writing audit standard for a layperson. We're writing for experienced auditors, and these are the core of an audit. And for us to engage with stakeholders on this, whether they be audit practitioners or regulators, we're going to have what appear to be esoteric conversations in the lead into making decisions that will drive our drafting. And I get, like, it may sound strange to an outsider, but you know, it's sort of like seeing the sausage being made in the process and judging us until the final product is done. And you know, I guess I can't really be apologetic about that. I just think we have to go through the process, and we'll be very conscious of the public interest requirements and the need for writing standards as clear as possible. A little context, remember, we wrote an entirely clear standard, ISA 500 revised in an ED format that was very principle-based, and we're redoing it because it was too high level in the minds of audit regulators and others in the marketplace. And so, like, we'll get that balance right, and we'll be very clear to it. But I think we're going to have a lot of challenging discussions as we take on these topics, because these standards have to stand the test of time too, or they won't be fit for purpose for the types of work that auditors are going to do with advanced technologies going forward.
Thank you, Tom. I don't see any further hands for you, Tom. So I don't know if I think that's a sign of success. If people run out of questions, easy or difficult to ask you. Thank you very much for your time. I just want to double check now. Everybody's hands are down. So thank you. As I wrap up on this session, thank you. We will talk to each other and see each other again in October. We will definitely spend some specific time on the joint project. I will just remind the board members, I'm going to give you a little bit of a longer break because we have a public session after this for the approval of the for the certification of the approved standard, the fraud standard that was already approved by the IWSB comes up for certification. And I'm conscious of the fact that people might want to because they're interested in a dial in for this session. So I can't move the session earlier. So we will have a little bit of a long break now until 10 past the hour. For me, that's 16:10. And then we will convene with the certification session, which will also be in a public session. Thank you, everybody. See you in a while.
All I wanna be All I wanna be, I know.
Okay, Martin, do we have everybody back in the room?
I think we see initials, so I think everyone's coming back, Linda, as you open.
Okay, if you do a quick check, because I've left my glove. Oh, I found them. I couldn't find my glove. I thought I left them in the kitchen.
Okay, let's see.
Let's just
And
quickly
we need
see.
Tom.
Yes, we do
There's
need
Tom.
Tom.
Okay.
Ah,
Speak,
Tom, we see Tom.
speak of the angel.
All right.
I would have
think
thought
we
of
can-
another term, Dave, but
Yeah, being polite. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming back on time. We are in one of those nice sessions where we have the opportunity to look at one of the standards approved by the IAASB that we can consider for PIOB certification. So we're focusing on the fraud standard today. We thank you, Tom, and thank you to your team for all the documents that you've prepared. As always, we have had our own team look through it, also consider very finely and carefully our public interest issues as well as due process. I'll maybe just say one or two things about the fraud standard, and then I'm going to hand over to Martin and the observation team. But this has been something that's been very, very important for the PIOB, Tom, as you know, for a long time. And because it is such an important standard, and we so often have seen in practice, if whenever there's some or other fraud, fairly or unfairly, everybody will ask, where were the auditors? And an auditor is not a forensic auditor to go and find fraud, but your board has managed to do some quite significant work to make sure that there's sufficient work effort when it comes to the auditor considering the risk of fraud that leads to the misstatement of financial statements, to bring it to a similar level than the auditor's duty to consider the risk of error. So there are lots of positive things that's coming out of the standard, lots of positive things when it comes to transparency. So certainly been one of the key priorities for the PIOB to see how we progress collectively as a group of standard setters, you doing all the work and we looking from the sideline and giving you our thoughts and guidance, Tom and Willie and the team. I'm going to hand over to you, Martin, and then I would imagine probably Pavel or Naraya to just talk us through where we are. Just remind us, because we're in a public session and some people might be interested when they listen to this video, just to be reminded of what the key things were that we tracked as the PIOB, what we refer to as our public interest issues throughout the process, and then we can conclude on that. So over to you first. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Linda. I confirm that that's exactly what we will do. We'll take some time just to work through our conclusions and our recommendations to the board. It's always a team effort here. So on this occasion, it's Naraya who will take that forward, but obviously Pavel, Naraya, and myself have been very much involved in all of this together with our board. Naraya, would you like to pick up directly?
Yes, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Linda. So I will just give a brief summary of the key considerations and conclusions that the staff has reached and the recommendation for the board in respect of certification. Just to summarize, the board has received the staff analysis and the IWSB documentation that includes a cover note, the final text of the standard that was approved, the basis for conclusions document, a due process checklist, and the IWSB certification that the standard has been developed in accordance with a great due process and is responsive to the public interest. In terms of due process, the PIOB has overseen the standard setting process throughout the full development cycle of the fraud standard. This standard is the result of public consultation, included a discussion paper, an exposure draft, also deliberation at the IWSB public meetings, and targeted outreach with investors and users, among other stakeholders. So in terms of public interest responsiveness, we have evaluated that the standard meets the PIF, the public interest framework qualitative characteristics, and that the public interest issues that were raised either by stakeholders through the consultation and by the PIOB were effectively addressed. So comments from respondents to the exposure draft were reported to the IWSB and recorded in the issues papers, and they have been dealt with and presented in the basis for conclusion how the IWSB addressed those comments and adjusted the revised standard after the exposure draft. There are two public interest issues that were further discussed in the last meeting of the IWSB that raised some concerns from several stakeholders and also among the PIOB. And those were regarding the consideration of the risk of management, override of controls, and the inclusion of a standback requirement. So the PIOB discussed this as well in the last board meeting in April, and with Tom as well in the public session. Our observer had attended also that meeting, and we concluded that the provisions were responsive to the concerns raised by the stakeholders and that they were in the public interest. So just focusing now more on the PIOB public interests that were raised during the development of the standard. So there were a number of issues that we had raised. Specifically, the PIOB called to strengthen and clarify the auditor's responsibilities regarding the identification and the reporting of fraud in audits. The PIOB also encouraged the revision of the role of auditors with respect to the authenticity of documentation across the ISAs. And as we have discussed as well in the previous session, we have acknowledged that the IASB will take this further through the Audit Evidence and Risk Response project. Also emphasize the impact of other standards on ISAs, on ISA 240, to drive changes in auditors' attitude and behavior throughout the audit process. Noted the importance of coordination with IASB in respect of fraud and NOCLAR. And finally, in terms of transparency, the IASB highlighted and emphasized the benefits of providing early warning of suspected fraud through communication with those charged with governance, with management, and with external authorities where appropriate. Also, the PIOB has encouraged the IASB to consider whether the disclosure of significant fraud matters with the key audit matter approach, so through the key audit matter section of the audit report, was the most appropriate, as this is limited to listed entities or publicly traded entities when PITRAC 2 becomes effective. So the PIOB, in respect of this issue, has acknowledged the support from most stakeholder groups through the exposure draft of this approach and the rationale for adopting this decision, but also has recommended the IASB to monitor whether through implementation, this is addressing sufficiently the stakeholder demands to have more transparency in the auditor report. Overall, the IASB has considered all the public interest issues raised by the PIOB, except for two where the PIOB has considered that further work and further monitoring will be needed, as I mentioned before. So these closures in the CAM section and the role of auditors in respect of authenticity of documentation. But it's important to highlight that while further work might be necessary, these matters do not detract from the fact that the revised standard is a significant evolution, that it clarifies the role of auditors and strengthens the work effort and enhances disclosures of fraud-related matters. So in summary, the PIOB staff considered that the PIOB public interest issues raised have been adequately addressed. And in conclusion, based on the analysis that we performed, the PIOB staff recommend the board to certify that ISA 240 revised has been developed in a manner consistent with agreed due process and is responsive to the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Naraya. That was really succinct, but in all the detail that we needed. I'm just going to circle to the board members to check if there are any comments or questions that anybody would like to raise before I ask you to apply your minds to what was proposed by the oversight staff. Everybody comfortable? We've certainly had many opportunities to discuss the standard and the progress with the standard. Can I ask the PIOB members by the show of hands then if you support the proposal that Naraya has put to us that we can certify ISA 240 for the two elements? Remember, we always look at due process, but we also look at whether it serves the public, whether it's responsive to the public interest, and our measurement is against what we over time have tracked as our public interest issues. So by a show of hands, can I see your support? Just want to make sure that I haven't missed anybody that's not in support. Okay, thank you. I think we can then therefore conclude that it has been certified. Well done, Tom and Willie and James and the team. Very well done. I really do believe that this is a significant step forward when it comes to also dealing with the expectation gap. Tom, you definitely want to say something, I've got no doubt.
Well, I'm really pleased, obviously, that ISO 240 revised has been certified, and really looking forward to confirming this to the marketplace. Obviously, we'll coordinate with your team. But to me, 240 and going concern were vexing issues for too long. I'm glad that our board decided to take decisive action here. I think in both instances, driving clarity about the positive requirements for an auditor in this space, being really clear how it ties to the risk-based approach of auditing, and being clear about what the appropriate response is, and then providing transparency in the auditor's report on both should go a long way at addressing the expectations gap. And these are two of the most important things that we've done during my time, and so really happy that it's out in the marketplace.
Thank you very much. Absolutely agree with that. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay, as we conclude then on the certification, we have one or two more things to do in the public session. Before we go into a private session, we have, Martin, the public minutes from the April meeting, which Tom and Gabriella has also cast an eye to make sure that we appropriately represented what was said from their side. Martin, anything that you want to say on those minutes before I ask the board members to approve it?
No, nothing to add, Linda. Just look forward to any board comments.
Thank you. And can I ask board members if there are small edits that you've picked up, because those tend to always creep in, please would you just pass them on to Martin and Rathio, the team, directly. But if you have any concerns in principle, now would be the time to raise them. Everybody comfortable? Can I see your hand in support of approving the minutes? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And then we have one or two small things to do. We need to, Martin, maybe just spend a minute on the calendar for the rest of the year. We are now well through 50% of the year. We've got 2 more rounds of observations to do, Martin, so I'm sure you just want to spend a minute to remind us where we are.
Yes, thank you, Linda. In fact, I can be very brief indeed. I mean, clearly we always allocate observers to the SSB meetings, and we've done that. We will probably need to just revisit that a little bit in relation to the fact that the observations for the time being are being done virtually. And we obviously have to just make sure that the time zone differences do not, make that impossible to be achieved in a meaningful way. So we may change some of the allocation of observers, but there's no further changes there. We do intend to carry out our observations in the usual way.
Okay, perfect. So you'll be in contact, especially with the existing observers in the next week or two. Martin, I've had a pre-discussion on this, and let's just see how we put that together. Mark.
Yeah, just 2 observations on this timetable. I think we should add to it the call to consider the certification of PI Track 2 in August. And I'm not quite sure why we don't have a scheduled PIOB meeting in December, perhaps that's going to be scheduled in January 2026 instead. But at that meeting or around that time, I think we're scheduled to consider the certification of the IAASB's experts standard. So I think we should factor either a full PIOB board meeting in the usual quarterly way, or a specific call to consider experts.
Yes, and we normally we don't have a December meeting. It depends how the standard setting board's timelines work out, because if the meetings are a little bit late, it goes into your Christmas holidays, and then we normally have it. We also don't have time for the staff to prepare all the documents and so on. So we will have the usual meeting in January, but obviously, Martin, you will work all of those in. And I think even though we haven't set the meetings for 2026 yet, it would be worthwhile for us to at least just set that first meeting so that people can start working it into their diaries. Thanks, Mark. And Martin, do you want to also talk about the due process approvals?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark. Indeed, in a sense, that's exactly arising from the next item. So I was just going to mention that obviously we confirmed the 26th of August to do the certification of the PI-Track 2, and we do need to then work out when we will do the second certification you referred to on the expert. So we will work through that, as you suggested, Linda, finding the right balance, because we do need some time after the SSB board meetings in December to be able to gather what is necessary to hold a meaningful board meeting. So we'll be looking at all of that in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll be able to confirm so that that's publicly available information as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Tom and Gabriella and Ken and Willie and James, for being here for the public session and for all your contributions and documents that you submitted. We can close the public session now, and I'm going to also at the same time ask the PIOB staff to recuse themselves from the meeting, as we're going to go into, with the exception of Martin, of course, but as we're going to go into a private session now. Thank you. Cheers, everybody. Okay, Martin, I think that's everybody. We've got Claudia. For those of you that can see Claudia, it's just because she's the administrator, but will she go off, Martin?
I was just on the phone to say, Claudia, just stopping the recording at that point.
Recording. Yes, we can see that.
So then I can start the recording now. So there's a